Welcome to another episode, all. Throughout this episode, I'm going to be discussing of how the concept of neurodiversity actually promotes our chance of survival. While those who oppose neurodiversity are actually suggesting that we should cause premature extinction. Let's get started. All the way back from Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, he always chose that it was by natural selection, where nature does the selecting. Unfortunately, he produced a book called Origin of the Species, which greatly influenced his half-cousin Francis Galton, who is behind the concept of normality, who has produced this whole irrationale of the normal human. And behind this concept of normality, Francis Galton wanted to do artificial selection and repopularise what are called eugenics, which eventually led us to the eugenics movement, which was entirely racist altogether and discriminatory. So, Francis Galton intended to improve the human race, believing that humans are genetically deterministic, that our fate is determined by our genes, but we know that that's not true. And he had great problems with this by the fact that the genes which he saw as superior were also inferior in other ways, and those which he saw as inferior were superior in other ways. So how exactly could he possibly define a gene as superior or inferior when there showed signs of both ways? He couldn't do that exactly. I'm just going to quote someone from called Dr. Gaber Mate from The Myth of Normal. A recent book is brought out. I quote, "The dominant assumption in our culture is that genetic inheritance determines the better part of our destiny, who we are, what we suffer from, and what we are capable of. In 2000, at a White House briefing, Bill Clinton proclaimed the findings of the Human Genome Project, the most wondrous map ever produced by humankind, adding that, today we are learning the language in which God created life. The new science, the soon-to-be ex-president predicted, will revolutionise the diagnosis, prevention, and treatment of most, if not all, human disease, leading to cures for conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and cancer by attacking their genetic roots. 2 decades later, we know that little of the sort has happened, and for good reason. Genes are not, in fact, life's language, any more than a scrambled alphabet or a randomly arranged dictionary is a Shakespeare play, or a musical scale is equivalent to a John Coltrane solo. For letters or words to become language, they must be arranged, enunciated, inflected, punctuated with pauses, emphasized or softened. Like all building blocks, genes help make up the language of existence, but it is through the workings of epigenetics that they are activated, accented, or quieted. The mechanisms of epigenetics include, among myriad others, adding certain molecules to DNA sequences so as to change gene function, modifying the numbers of receptors for certain messenger chemicals, and influencing the interactions between genes. Experience, in other words, determines how our genetic potential expresses itself in the end. This is what the field of epigenetics, meaning on top of genes, is all about. Epigenetic processes act on chromosomes delivering and translating messages from the environment that tell the genes what to do. All this takes place without in any way altering the genes themselves. As the BBC's Martha Henriques explains, epigenetics offers a way of adapting to changing conditions without inflicting a more permanent shift in our genomes. It isn't that genes don't matter, they certainly do, only that they cannot dictate even the simplest behaviours, let alone account for most illnesses or address possible cures for them. Far from being the autonomous arbiters of the destinies, genes answer to their environment. Without environmental signals, they could not function. End of quote. In that section it brought up the Human Genome Project. And again, the Human Genome Project is founded upon a fallacy. It is. If you just allow me to go to a page in another book. I quote someone called Matt Ridley. Matt Ridley points out, the Human Genome Project is founded upon a fallacy. There is no such thing as the human genome. Neither in space nor in time can such a definite object be defined. At hundreds of different loci, scattered throughout the 23 chromosomes, there are genes that differ from person to person. Nobody can say that blood group A is normal and O, B and AB are abnormal. So when the Human Genome Project publishes the sequence of a typical human being, what will it publish for the ABO gene on chromosome 9? The project's declared aim is to publish the average or consensus sequence of 200 different people. But this would miss the point in the case of the ABO gene, because it is a crucial part of its function that it should not be the same in everybody. Variation is an inherent and integral part of the human, or indeed any, genome. End of quote. So, altogether here, the Human Genome Project actually is founded upon a fallacy altogether. And this fallacy was begun by Francis Galton, of how he produced the concept of normal by, like where you think of a circle with where a line just touches the edge of it, producing a right angle. It's just perpendicular. That's why it's called the norm in your mathematical lessons, because originally that's where normality comes from. Normal, say, the averaging method, and Francis Galton decided to cluster them all together. From under the normal distribution bell curve, that was by Francis Galton, and his artificial selection of which gene should we pass on to the next generation. But the fact that so many genes have been passed on that we saw as bad, that shows that people were rather mistaken, and that we should not go curing genetic disease, genetic disability, and so on, just because we perceive it and decide to classify it as a disease. I'm just going to turn to my laptop to read out something to you concerning evolution. I quote, "In Africa, researchers found sickle cell-shaped red blood cells in people across a broad belt from Nigeria in West Africa to Tanzania in the east. The cells also turned up at high rates in people in parts of the Near East and India, and in southern European countries such as Greece. Genetically speaking, this made no sense, because inheriting 2 copies of the gene is so deadly. The mutation should have become rarer with passing generations, not more common. In 1954, a South African-born geneticist named Anthony C. Allison observed that people in Uganda who carried a copy of the sickle cell mutation suffered fewer malaria infections than people with normal hemoglobin. Later research confirmed Dr. Allison's finding. The sickle cell mutation seemed to defend against malaria by starving the single-celled parasite that causes the disease. The parasite feeds on hemoglobin, and so it's possible that it can't grow on the sickle cell version of the molecule. Sickle cells are a rare example of human evolution where we have a good idea of what happened and why, said Bridget Penman, a malaria expert at the University of Warwick in England. End of quote. So that's just one example of how what we classify to be a disease, something we classified as bad, is actually something of very good. So the things that we see as bad today, such as in this case what causes sickle cell disease, we've perceived that as bad. But in some parts of the world, such as the African area, where this sickle cell mutation is more dominant, malaria is endemic in that part of the world right now. It's endemic there. And when we look at other diseases, we found that they tend to be more dominant in particular areas of the world. And in those areas of the world, there tends to be mutations that enable individuals to survive those dominant diseases. So I don't think this is mere coincidence that just at around the right time when malaria is becoming endemic, this gene which causes what we thought to be a disease becomes more popular. I don't see it as a coincidence of how it's going on with other diseases around the world. And then, if diversity is essential for survival, this makes me wonder to myself, well, if we were all genetically identical, how would we survive exactly? If we were genetically identical, every human, because we'll just go to a different area of the world, and when we do so, we will be so foreign to all the foreign germs, and we won't be able to get along with them. You know, where Dr. Gabermate said about the environment tells our genes what to do. It's not our genes that decide to cause the disease. So just because someone's got the sickle cell mutation, that does not mean they are destined for sickle cell disease. Just because someone's got mutations associated with autism, that does not mean that the individual is destined to have neurodevelopmental disorders, as we currently call them. And so on. So this whole idea of normality by Francis Galton, going by artificial selection instead of Charles Darwin's natural selection theory, the natural selection seems to know what it's doing. Nature seems to have a strong idea of what it's doing, it does. So there must be reasons of why these mutations are continuing. And mutations are always going to continue reproducing, because with mutagenesis being the process of replicating and repairing genes, if we just perfectly replicated our parents, we'd be genetically identical. If our children then perfectly replicated us, they'd be genetically identical to both us and their grandparents. And if our grandkids perfectly replicated their parents, all of us, again, generation after generation, would be genetically identical. There would be no genetic diversity among us. So that tells me that mutations are supposed to occur. So the ideology of eliminating mutations associated with disabilities actually is the suggestion of premature extinction, because evolution actually occurs from the margins. It begins on the margins. Like when we think of cultural evolution, how our cultures have evolved, it began by protesting in little minorities on the outside of our societies, of our cultures. It was the minority that generated the evolution. And it's the same with human evolution. It originates from the margins, from the outside, and then multiplies as the sickle cell mutation getting more common, and now it's becoming more and more common. So now I'm just going to quote another individual called Evelyn Fox Keller. Just give me time to turn to them. Right, I quote, Evelyn Fox Keller, Professor of History and Philosophy of Science at MIT, explains, we now know that mechanisms for enduring genetic stability are a product of evolution, yet a surprising number of mutations in which at least some of these mechanisms are disabled have been found in bacteria living under natural conditions. Why do these mutants persist? Is it possible that they provide some selective advantage to the population as a whole? Might the persistence of some mutated genes in a population enhance the adaptability of that population? Apparently so. New mathematical models of bacterial populations in variable environments confirm that, under such conditions, selection favours the fixation of some mutated alleles, and furthermore, that their presence accelerates the pace of evolution. End of quote. So, in this case with Evelyn Fox Keller, it's actually the mutations that enhance our adaptability, and the species that survive is not the most intelligent one, it's not the strongest one. The species which survives is the ones who can adapt to change. So where that says enhances our adaptability. So all these mutations, these alleles which have been associated with disabilities, are actually an evolutionary advantage to us. So if we eliminate those mutations, we eliminate that enhancement. So we will go in the opposite direction and go closer, head in the direction of extinction. We will. And we won't evolve with the rest of nature, but we'll go in the opposite direction called devolution. There were very religious people in Charles Darwin's day, so devolution as the opposite of evolution. I rather like it about the first two syllables, spelled devil, devolution. And talking about extinction going to death, the devil represents death, so devolution. That was quite a coincidence I came across in my mind. There's a psychologist called Howard Gardner. He warns, with the coming of age of genetics, the danger magnifies. Beyond doubt, we will discover genes that are important for reading alphabetical scripts, and there is already evidence that a small set of genes may be related to reading problems. As with the brain evidence, such information can be helpful for early intervention, but it could easily be used for stigmatizing purposes. Indeed, it might become relevant for marriage prospects, holding a job, securing insurance, or even eugenic purposes. And no doubt, especially in our interventionist society, individuals with a genetic predisposition for reading problems will look into various kinds of genetic engineering or therapy. It is possible that such interventions will work and have no negative side effects, but it is perhaps more likely that they will have unanticipated effects. And we might even want to consider which valued human abilities, spatial or pattern recognition skills, might be placed at risk were we to target our intervention specifically at reading disorders. Close quote. I would say Howard Gardner has a great point there, such as we've seen through history, whenever mankind has tried to control nature, it has always resulted in devastating consequences. Hundreds of diseases which are on our earth today, of pandemics that we've experienced, of all these different kind of diseases like AIDS, Lyme disease, epidemic diseases, they don't just happen. It's a direct result of what humans have done to nature. Just think of the pollution, the greenhouse gases, the increased natural hazards. Were any of these participated by scientists when we interfered with nature? We as humans, we interfered with nature, and now we've found that some devastating consequences have followed. So unanticipated effects have occurred. So I would say Howard Gardner's got a good point there. And where he says about what abilities are we going to put at risk? As I've pointed out, on previous episodes, there's some things neurodivergent people can do. Autistic people, those with Down syndrome, dyslexics, those with dyspraxia, Down syndrome, ADHD, who can do things that people without that disability can't do. So if you eliminate that, you eliminate those abilities. So what abilities are we going to destroy, and how much diversity are we going to eliminate? I'm just going to quote someone else now. As autism advocate Temple Grandin points out, aware adults with autism and their parents are often angry about autism. They may ask why nature or God created such horrible conditions as autism, manic depression, and schizophrenia. However, if the genes that cause these conditions were eliminated, there might be a terrible price to pay. It is possible that persons with bits of these traits are more creative, or possibly even geniuses. If science eliminated these genes, maybe the whole world would be taken over by accountants. Close quote. Oh, I certainly see that coming. If we eliminate the diversity, and so on. Yeah, I do see the whole world becoming accountants. If you would like to know some positive things about many disabilities, I strongly recommend this book, The Power of Neurodiversity, by PhD Thomas Armstrong. You'll be able to find some positive things about bipolar disorder, some positive things about ADHD, Down syndrome, depression disorders, dyslexia. He spells out and points out the scientific studies that have shown all the advantages. And there was an experiment done by someone called Stephen K. Karp, where he asked a group of autistic adults, what is neurodiversity in your own words? That's what Stephen K. Karp asked them all. And they all said that it rather works as an activist tool to promote inclusion and so on, and they pointed out that we should enhance the acceptance of biological differences from cognition, brains, and genes to sustain and keep the valuable differences that we see, but provide accommodation, interventions, treatments, and so on for the difficulties, for the profound challenges that come with them, but they wanted to sustain these valuable differences. So among all neurodivergent populations, they didn't just see it as wrong, they saw both the profound challenges and they saw the valuable differences. So they saw both sides of the coin the autistic people did. But most other people, non-autistic, don't look at both sides of the coin until they are told to. But the autistic people could just see both sides, not blinded by emotions. Even though they do have emotions, such as one of the positive effects of autism is we've seen that there's an enhanced consistency in logical thinking and analytical thinking in autistic minds. So when it comes to emotional situations, for example, this is why we might come off as not very empathetic, because we've got an enhanced consistency in logical thinking, that we're trying to think of a logical explanation to what's going on. We're trying to make logical sense of everything, but sometimes we just don't handle emotional situations emotionally. We're just doing it logically, trying to come up with a logic where, but often in emotional situations there's not a logical explanation. So we don't find one. So that's why we sometimes come up as people who lack empathy. But we don't actually lack it. That's just a stereotype. So I would say out of all the studies which have been done concerning genes, concerning human development in general, concerning evolution, going and doing eugenics, eliminating these genes, trying to get rid of that enhancement of our adaptability, trying to interfere with nature, this will actually send us in the opposite direction. So as we can see where the sickle cell mutation, that's actually enabling our species to survive by enhancing the adaptability of our population. Remember where it said that the environment tells your genes what to do, and when we are in the same environment as each other, imagine you were in my environment right now, the same room as me. You and I are part of the environment itself, so I'm telling your genes what to do and you're telling my genes what to do. So our genes are actually interacting with each other. So you may not have the mutations that are associated with autism, but the mutations associated with autism are interacting with you. And whichever mutations you have are interacting with me when we're in the same environment to each other. So that explains greatly of how even though so few people have these mutations, they are managed to be selected through natural selection. And this is why I don't want to eradicate anything from nature, but actually want nature to take its course. So even though I don't know nature's course, I don't know where nature's going to take us, I would rather go by nature's course, since I know that nature knows what it's doing. I do not think that humans should take into their own hands which parts of a human should be allowed to survive, which parts should be eliminated. I think we should accept humans as a whole, altogether, both the positive side and the negative side of us. The negative things we experience in life and the positive. I think we should accept both. Because by accepting these disabilities, it increases the diversity of human diversity. So neurodiversity increases our resilience, because the more diverse, the more resilient we will be. These mutations enhance our adaptability. So neurodiversity enhances our adaptability, enabling survival. And since we don't know the future, what we see as good function right now might be bad functioning in the future. Like if the malaria becomes worldwide, actually dominates the entire earth, I would say the sickle cell mutation would be the superior gene, and those of us without the sickle cell mutation will be the ones as inferior. And we'll really be wanting that gene. But right now we're saying we don't want it. But in the future, if malaria keeps spreading, we'll want it. So we don't know what's going to be good for us in the future, nor do we know what's going to be bad for us. So us going now and doing what we think is right to eradicate diseases, eradicate disorders, comorbidities and so on, that will only reduce the diversity and send us in the direction of premature extinction, because we will not be able to adapt anymore, because we've just gone and eliminated all the mutations that enhanced our adaptability. So I really do believe neurodiversity promotes our survival, promotes our world, promotes progression, brings more ideas to our world, and makes the world a much more flourishing place. So we should actually be grateful for these disabilities, for these mutations that we call bad, because they seem to be having good effects in the long run, and they seem to, the more scientific research done on them, the more positive we're finding from it. So I would say don't have too much of a negative look onto disability in general. Because as I've said before, disability always has been and always will be contextual, and the only reason you believe in the existence of a normal brain is because of Francis Galton and his artificial selection. All man-made. The concept of normality. That's the only reason you think there's something wrong with autism. It's not a coincidence that all these diseases, disorders and so on were identified after Francis Galton's life or during it. As soon as he made that normal distribution curve and so on, suddenly all these diseases, disorders began arising, but they were already here beforehand. They'd already been here for hundreds of thousands of years. So why didn't anyone have a problem with them then? No one saw it as problematic, autism. They just saw it as general human behaviour. They didn't see it as any kind of disorder. So why do today's people see it as a disorder? Because we have educated people to believe it's a disorder. And then you internalise that belief system that anything that's not normal is a disorder. So by categorising humanity, standardising it, that's where the disorders have come from. That's why you see these genes as bad, even though I've just witnessed from the studies I've read through, that these so-called bad genes actually enhance and promote our survival. So if we eliminate them, we are actually only going to cause our own extinction. So I would like you all to have a deeper think and see if you can actually do some research into these disabilities and go outside of the norm. Stop thinking of normality and actually explore these differences. Don't be afraid to break the norm. We need more people outside of it. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. I would appreciate you to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have any questions for me, or if there's anything you would like me to talk about, please leave it in the comments sections and I may do a video on it in the future. Thank you.